Tell me you don't feel it. His voice was barely a whisper. Raw, trembling, desperate Adrian Wolfe, the ruthless billionaire who once believed love was weakness, now stood before the woman he had almost destroyed, begging, "Tell me you don't feel me the way I feel you." Clara could barely breathe. Her heart was screaming. Her past warned her to run, but his touch, his eyes told a different story. He wasn't the man who once caged her. He was the man who had been remade by loving her. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer afraid, because sometimes love doesn't arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it begins in brokenness and becomes something unshakable. This is a story of obsession turned devotion, of pain that found its purpose, of a love so fierce, it changed them both forever. If you believe that even the darkest hearts can learn to love, then stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because now, the story begins. The city lights of Los Angeles flickered below as the night stretched silently over the Vesperin Hotel. In the highest suite, shadows danced across the polished floor, and the only sound was the quiet clink of ice in a crystal glass. Adrian Wolfe, a man of 34, stood alone near the window. His suit was still sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, but his mind was far from celebration. Hours ago, he had closed one of the most significant deals of his life, a victory earned through strategy, sleepless nights, and relentless ambition. But there was no joy in his eyes. Success for Adrian had long since lost its shine. He had learned to treat life like a game, one built on power distance and control. Love had no place in that world. It never had. Not since the day his mother walked out for someone richer. Not since he watched woman after woman approach him with practiced smiles and eyes that lingered too long on his wealth. He had made himself untouchable. Until tonight. 1 minute. Clara had been standing in the hotel lobby checking her phone. The next two men in dark suits had appeared at her side. Their faces were blank, their voices sharp. "Go upstairs. Do not make him wait." Before she could even ask who he was, they were guiding her into an elevator. The doors closed with a soft chime, sealing her inside. Her heart thudded with confusion. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The moment the elevator stopped at the top floor and the doors slid open, everything unraveled. She was pushed gently but firmly into a vast, silent suite. The door locked behind her with a mechanical click. She turned to protest, to ask what this was about, but the hallway was already empty. Gone. And now she stood frozen in place, alone, with a stranger whose name she did not know, in a room that felt colder than winter. Adrian turned to face her. His gaze fell on the trembling girl like a blade. His jaw clenched as he took in the sight of her soft, unsure, nervous. He saw only what he expected to see, manipulation wrapped in innocence. So this was the trick now. He thought, send a woman to lure him, a trap dressed in perfume and pretty eyes. They must have believed he would fall for it. Lose control, give in. They underestimated him. His smile came, but it held no warmth, only ice. This is their idea of subtle. His voice was low and bitter, like smoke curling from a flame long extinguished. They think I will fall for this. Clara flinched. I do not know what you are talking about, she said, her voice trembling. But Adrian didn't hear her words, not really. He only saw another face like the ones before. He stepped closer. The space between them vanished far too quickly. She backed away instinctively. Her hands clutched tightly in front of her chest. Don't bother acting like you don't know, he growled. You come in here dressed like that, looking helpless, thinking I'll forget who I am. I am not here for anything like that. Clara whispered, eyes wide with panic. I promise. Save it, he snapped. You were sent to test me, to drag me down like the rest of them. His voice was flat now, controlled, cruel. If that's the game, fine, I'll play it. Fear gripped Clara's spine as his meaning settled in. He believed she was there to seduce him, to use him. No, please. I think there's been a mistake. She gasped, but her words shattered on deaf ears. He reached out and caught her wrist, not violently, not yet, but firm, unshakable. Her breath caught as he pulled her closer. You came here for something, Adrian said coldly. Earn it. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She shook her head. You're wrong, she whispered. But Adrian had stopped believing in innocence long ago. He didn't see the fear in her eyes as real. He didn't feel the tremble in her voice as truth. All he saw was another performance, another illusion, and yet, somewhere beneath the armor of his certainty, something shifted. There was something too raw in her panic, too real in the way her body tensed. Not like someone pretending, but someone breaking. Still, he ignored it. He had to. His voice dropped into a near whisper. You stepped into the wrong man's world, sweetheart, he said, his breath brushing her skin. And now, you'll learn what it costs. Clara's heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. She tried to move, to speak, to beg, but nothing would change what he had already decided. In his mind, she was guilty, and in this room, he was judge-jury, and the one who would leave her forever changed. That night, Clara's fate had been sealed not by her own choices, but by a cruel misstep written by hands she could not see. The air inside the Vesperon penthouse grew thick, almost unbreathable. Adrian stood before her, his figure tall and cold, like stone. His eyes, once golden with fire, were now darkened by suspicion. The sharp lines of his face carved themselves deeper as he stared at the girl trembling against the glass wall. Under the soft golden glow of the chandelier, Clara looked impossibly small. Her shoulders shook, her lips quivered, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but Adrian had seen tears before, too many of them. To him, innocence had become a performance, beauty was a tool, and every word from a woman's lips was just another line in a well-rehearsed script. He had trained himself not to believe. Not in kindness, not in purity, not in second chances. And tonight, he had no tolerance for illusions. His lips twisted into a smirk, cold, emotionless. You think I haven't seen this before? His voice was slow, laced with mockery. Soft voice, pretty face, scared eyes. That act has been played 1,000 times, Clara, and I don't fall for it. She stepped back on instinct, her spine meeting the hard surface of the glass behind her, caged nowhere to run, her breath caught in her throat. Please, I shouldn't be here. There's been a mistake. He chuckled, the sound bitter and hollow. Save your breath, he said, as he adjusted his cufflink like she was nothing more than a passing nuisance. You all think fear makes you convincing, but I have heard better lies from women with sharper tongues. No, you don't understand. Clara's voice broke as she tried again. Louder this time, more desperate. I was brought here by mistake. I'm not who you think I am. But her pleas hit a wall. Adrian leaned in just close enough that she could feel his breath, soft and cold. Enough, he whispered, voice low and final. I don't tolerate liars, and I don't pity gold diggers. Clara's stomach turned, his words cut sharper than blades. She looked into his eyes and saw nothing. No kindness, no mercy. Just a cold certainty that she was guilty, her hands pressed against the glass behind her, trembling. I swear, I'm telling the truth. She whispered, tears now spilling down her cheeks. I've never done anything like this. I don't even know why I'm here. But Adrian had already made his decision. In his world, no one was innocent, especially not the beautiful ones who arrived uninvited with shaking hands and sad eyes. His hand lifted slowly, fingers brushing against the curve of her jaw, deceptively gentle. You walked into the wrong man's den, he murmured, voice like a promise carved in stone. And now you'll see what happens when you pretend to be something you're not. Adrian tilted Clara's chin upward with a single measured movement, leaving her no choice but to meet his gaze. There was no warmth there, just a quiet, consuming fire, the kind that didn't burn skin but scorched belief. You chose the wrong man to fool. He whispered, his voice smooth but edged like a blade. His fingers were strangely gentle, yet carried a weight that pinned her still. And tonight, you'll pay for it. Clara's breath caught her chest, rising in short, panicked gasps. Terror climbed her throat like vines, choking her. Her hands reached for his wrist, trembling, weak. She tried to push him back, not with strength but with fear and desperation. Please, please don't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking like glass under pressure. Adrian did not blink. He watched her, the way storms observe still water with hunger. Begging won't save you. He murmured, his eyes fixed on the trail of tears now slipping silently down her cheeks. You women, he continued almost to himself. You flutter your lashes, spill a few tears, and expect men to fall at your feet. He leaned closer. His breath brushed her skin like winter air, cold, unfeeling. I do not fall. The words were carved from stone, dropped between them, like a sentence already past. I am not lying. Clara sobbed, voice thin and shaking. I don't even know why I'm here. Please. But the moment had already closed around her like a trap. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier, the walls pressed in silent and merciless. Adrian's grip didn't hurt her, not yet, but it held her, claimed her, as if he were proving a point to himself more than to her. She could feel the heat of his body, the dangerous stillness of a man used to getting everything he ever wanted. And tonight, he had decided she was his lesson to deliver. Clara's mind scrambled for an escape, but she found none. She was trapped, caught in the crosshairs of a man who believed in power, not truth. Adrian's smirk deepened as he took in her trembling frame. He could see her fear, feel it in her breath, taste it in the silence between her pleas, and he liked it. You can stop pretending now, he said softly, his thumb brushing against her lips, feeling them tremble. No one is coming. No one will stop me. The words wrapped around her like chains. Her heart pounded so hard it blurred the world. She tried again. A whisper. Please. Her hands pressed against his chest, but he didn't move. He was stone steel, built from a life of control and distrust. Adrian leaned in his grip on her chin, firm, forcing her to look up. You're really committed to this little innocent act, he said, almost amused. A chuckle escaped him, low and bitter. I'll give you credit. The shaking, the tears, the way you look at me like I'm some kind of monster. His thumb pressed harder beneath her lip. It's almost convincing. Almost, but not enough. Because Adrian Wolfe had never trusted anyone, and he was not about to start now. It's a mask. Adrian whispered, his voice razor thin, laced with a cruel certainty that sliced straight through her hope. But I see right through it. Panic surged through Clara's chest like a crashing wave. She shook her head frantically, tears falling unchecked. Her body trembled, her breath came in uneven gasps. I'm not pretending, she sobbed. I swear, I'm not who you think I am. She reached for his wrist, grasping at him as if she could pull herself out of this nightmare with nothing but desperation. But Adrian's smirk didn't waver. His grip held fast, unmoved by her fear. Lies, he breathed, his voice so close it brushed against her skin. His breath sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. You all lie. You all play the same game. Soft words, wide eyes, thinking you'll fool me into believing you're different. His hand traced the side of her face, deceptively tender, his fingers ghosting down to her neck, then resting on her shoulder. There was a quiet claim in his touch, not gentle, not violent, but full of a dangerous kind of control. I don't fall for pretty illusions, he murmured, and I don't let liars walk away untouched. Clara's stomach twisted violently. She felt like the ground beneath her had vanished, like she was falling into something endless and dark. He was not listening. No matter how earnestly she pleaded, no matter how real her tears were, he had already judged her. And in his court there was no appeal. "Please," she begged, voice raw, her fingers clinging to the fabric of his sleeve as if it were the only thing keeping her from drowning. "Please just hear me." But Adrian Wolfe was not a man who gave second chances. His eyes narrowed, his patience splintering under the weight of his own anger. "Enough," he growled. With a sudden pull, he dragged her closer, her small frame crashing against his chest, her breath knocked loose. She was trapped in his hold, locked against his strength. "I've heard enough of your stories," he hissed. "Now you'll learn what happens when you try to manipulate me." A sob burst from Clara's lips. She fought against him, twisting, pushing, trying to break free, but it was like struggling against a storm. Adrian's grip was unyielding. His presence swallowed her whole. "So delicate," he murmured, his fingers brushing the soft skin of her arm as though cataloging her fragility. "It's almost tragic that you chose me." His words dripped with mockery, but his smile never faltered. Clara's breath came in short, erratic bursts. Panic clawed at her throat. "I'm not deceiving you," she whispered, her voice nearly gone. She tried again to push him away, but her strength was no match. Adrian chuckled, deep and cold. "Still clinging to that little act," he said, tilting his head. "I'll admit, you're convincing. The fear, the shaking, the pleading. You almost had me curious." Then his voice dropped darker than before. "But I wonder how long you can keep it up. How long before you break?" His words hit her like ice. This wasn't just about a lie he thought she'd told. He wanted to break her, to watch her shatter, to see every flicker of resistance die behind her eyes. He didn't want surrender, he wanted to witness it. And worst of all, he was enjoying it. The fear, the trembling. The way she crumbled beneath his touch, it fed something inside him. This wasn't punishment, it was power. And Adrian Wolfe was a man who lived for it. Clara gasped for air, her mind spiraling in every direction, searching for a way out, a word, a truth that might pierce his blindness. But right now, he saw only what he wanted to see, and nothing else. Adrian was too deep inside his own shadows to see the truth. His mind, wrapped tightly in pride and pain, refused to let in anything else. He had already chosen what she was, a liar, a trap, and no amount of pleading would ever change. That Clara's heart ached, a slow and crushing weight settling in her chest. Her legs weakened beneath her, as if even her body had given up. Still she tried one last time. "Please." The word was no louder than a breath, but it carried everything she had left. Adrian only smirked. He reached for her chin, tilting her face to his, forcing her to meet the cold certainty in his eyes. "I don't believe in fairy tales," he said softly, each word dipped in ice, "and I certainly don't believe in innocent girls who claim they don't belong." His thumb brushed her jawline, the gesture disturbingly gentle, a lie in itself, one that did not match the steel in his gaze. "So, Clara," he murmured, "how long do you plan to wear this mask?" Her tears streamed silently, her body sagged in quiet defeat, because now she knew he would not stop, he would not listen, he would not believe, he had already condemned her. In his eyes, she was nothing but another woman with soft lies and hidden motives. She had walked into his world uninvited and would now pay the price for every betrayal that came before her. And Adrian Wolfe. He had never been the type to second-guess himself. He had built his empire with brutal certainty, never looking back, never questioning his instincts, until now. In a single breath, everything shifted, his body stilled, the world tilted around him. Something changed in the air, something raw, undeniable. Clara's trembling form beneath his hands, the truth in her eyes, the innocence written across every inch of her pain. And then it hit him. a realization sharp enough to slice through bone. She had not lied, she had not come here to deceive, she had not belonged to anyone's scheme. Clara Whitmore was untouched, utterly devastatingly innocent, and he had crushed her. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. His hands, once so steady, began to tremble as if recoiling from the damage they had done. His chest tightened, not with anger, not with pride, but with something far worse, something he had never allowed himself to feel: regret. It poured into him cold and sickening, a weight he could not escape. For the first time in years, his confidence cracked, his grip loosened, his posture faltered, and before him the girl he had broken lay beneath him, silent, pale eyes wide and drowning in pain. Clara looked up at him with something that pierced deeper than any accusation, not hatred, not rage, just hurt. And in that gaze, Adrian saw the full weight of what he had done. The cruelty, the blindness, the refusal to listen, when she had begged him again and again to see her. She had never played a game, never acted. She had only been trying to survive. And he, so caught up in his own bitterness, so sure he was always right, had destroyed something that had never meant him harm. His stomach twisted, his pulse roared in his ears. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Wolfe wanted to take something back, but it was too late. The silence was deafening. Adrian stood frozen, his breath uneven as the weight of what he had done crashed into him like a storm breaking over a fragile shore. He had hurt her, not just in body but in something far deeper, something sacred. He had looked at Clara, seen only shadows, and judged her with no evidence, no mercy. And now the truth, raw, irrefutable, stood before him in the form of a girl he had broken. A harsh breath slipped from his lungs, jagged and hollow. His hands curled into fists at his sides as if gripping them tight enough might stop the chaos spiraling in his chest. His mind screamed questions he could not answer. How did I become this? He had built his entire life on control, on precision, on never letting his emotions cloud his judgment. He prided himself on seeing through the games people played, but this time, he had not seen the truth. He had missed it entirely, and in doing so, he had crushed something pure. Adrian's jaw locked his chest tight as he looked at her. Really looked. Clara was barely breathing. Her frame, trembling, her lips parted in a soundless sob. Her gaze wasn't on him. It was distant somewhere far away, as if she could not bear to exist in the same room with him. As if she had left her body just to survive it, and it was his fault. He wanted to reach out to fix it, to take back every word, every cruel assumption, every second he had spent seeing her as something she was not. But he didn't move. Because how could he? How could someone like him touch someone like her again? Not after this. His hands twitched uselessly by his sides, aching to wipe away her tears, but paralyzed by the truth he didn't deserve to. Clara's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. She looked so lost, so far away from the girl who had walked into his life by mistake. And the worst part wasn't that he had hurt her. The worst part was knowing that she had never meant him harm, that she had stood there vulnerable, pleading for understanding. And he had answered with cruelty. A sharp ache split his chest, not just guilt, but something darker, something heavier. Shame. He had always believed himself untouchable, beyond consequences. But now, standing before the one person who had asked for nothing but to be heard, he felt like a monster. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything that might ease what he had done. But no words would come because no words could undo it. He had destroyed something that could never be rebuilt. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. And the silence that stretched between them now, it was the echo of everything he had lost, and everything she would never give him again. As Adrian watched the pain flicker across Clara's face, something inside him broke completely. He had been wrong, devastatingly, unforgivably wrong. And now he would give anything to take it all back. His breath came in uneven waves, chest tightening with emotions he could not name, could not control. He had spent his life mastering restraint-building walls so high that not even grief could climb them. But tonight, those walls crumbled. This moment had shattered everything. He thought he knew his certainty, his pride, his sense of power. He had walked into the night, believing he held all the control. But standing here now, weighed down by regret so heavy it bent his spine, he finally understood Clara had changed him, and nothing would ever be the same. Adrien had never known what regret truly felt like. Not until now. He had always made decisions like a king in checkmate, swift, final, unquestioned. But now, in the dim hush of that broken room, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Remorse. Real soul-wrenching remorse. His gaze drifted to the girl he had crushed. Clara lay trembling, her small hands clinging to the sheets as if they were the last tether holding her to the world. Her face was turned away, but the tears didn't hide. They glistened along her cheeks, silent, shattering. Each one was a sentence written in his name. Adrien's throat tightened. He had told himself he didn't care, that he didn't feel, that nothing could touch him. But she had touched him, without trying, without meaning to, and he had destroyed her. He stood paralyzed, the urge to speak burning in his chest, but the words never came. What could he say? That he was sorry, that he had been wrong. What comfort could an apology offer a girl whose innocence he had trampled? He took a single step forward. Her body flinched, barely a movement, but it struck like lightning through his chest, a reaction so small and yet so powerful, it left him breathless. For the first time, Adrien understood what it meant to be feared. Not in power, but in rejection, in shame. She feared him. Not because of who he was, but because of what he had become in her eyes, and he hated it. He hated himself. Don't. Clara's voice cracked low and hollow. Don't touch me. Her shoulders shook with uneven breaths. She had curled in on herself as if trying to disappear into the safety of nothingness. She couldn't even look at him, and that broke him more than anything else ever could. Adrien had spent years believing that emotion was weakness, that love was a trick, and attachment was a chain meant to be broken. But now, standing in the wreckage of everything he thought he was, he saw the truth. It wasn't her who had ruined him. It was himself. And there was no one left to blame, only the man he saw now. Not in her eyes, but in his own. He wanted to touch her, to reach out to wipe away the tears he had caused. To hold her, even if just to say without words that he was sorry. But she would not let him, and why should she? He had treated her like a stranger, no worse, like a trap, like a threat. He had stripped her of dignity, stolen her voice, taken something sacred, something that could never be returned. Now no gesture could undo what he had done. No act of kindness could rewrite the cruelty that had already carved itself into her skin. Adrien had always believed he was beyond error, above emotion, untouchable. But now standing in the ruins of this moment, looking at the girl who refused to look back at him, he had never felt smaller, never felt weaker. Clara. He whispered, barely able to speak her name. His voice was raw, shredded by regret, but she did not move. She did not turn, did not flinch, did not speak. She simply lay there, still trembling, her hands curled in the sheets, her breath uneven, as though she had faded into some distant place inside herself, a place he could never reach, and he had sent her there. Adrien's throat tightened. He clenched his fists to stop himself from reaching for her, though every nerve in his body screamed to hold her, to take it back, to fix this. But he no longer had that right. He had stolen her choice, crushed her trust, broken something sacred, and now all that remained was silence, a silence so loud it drowned everything else. His chest ached, his mind spun, his pulse roared with one question that refused to leave him. How did I become this? He had spent a lifetime believing he was in control, that he could navigate anything, outthink anyone. But now, with Clara lying before him like a mirror shattered by his own hand, he could no longer deny it. This was the greatest mistake of his life, and it was too late. Too late to fix what he had fractured. Too late to change the way she looked at him, or worse, refused to look at all. He took a step back as if putting space between them would make the pain in his chest more bearable. But it didn't. Nothing did. Adhering had broken her, and now he would have to live with the weight of it. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg, but the words would not come, because deep down he knew. No apology could unmake the damage. No words could rewrite the truth. And the most unbearable part, he wasn't sure he could ever forgive himself. He had believed he could not feel, could not love. But Clara had changed that. She had changed him. And now, for the first time, Adrian Wolfe, the man who had ruled every room he entered, felt truly powerless. The image of her trembling, the tears, the way she had pulled away from him as if he were a monster. Maybe he was, but he could not accept that ending. He would not. Because somewhere inside the wreckage of what he had done, one truth remained. He needed her, and he would never be the same again. What Adrian felt was no longer just guilt. It was something darker, something far more consuming. It clawed through his chest like fire, filling his every breath with need, not for forgiveness, not even for peace, but for her. He couldn't let her go. Even if she hated him, even if she couldn't look him in the eye without trembling, he would keep her. He had to. Not just her body, not just her presence. He wanted her soul, her love, her everything, and he would do anything to have it. The moment Clara had been taken from his suite, his orders were absolute. She was not to be lost. Not for a second. His men moved with quiet precision, surrounding her with walls she couldn't see but would never escape. To him, it was protection. To her, it was a prison. When she awoke in one of his private estates, surrounded by guards at every door, she looked at him like he was the enemy, and it shattered him. He stood still watching as she tried to push past his men, fists pounding, her voice trembling. "Let me go!" She cried, her face a storm of fear and fury, but they didn't move. They couldn't, because he had told them not to. Adrian clenched his fists at his sides, his voice cold and certain as he stepped forward. "You're not leaving." She spun around, fire in her eyes. "You can't keep me here," she said through gritted teeth, her chest rising and falling with rage. He met her stare without flinching. "Watch me." Those two words were a vow, not just of possession, but of obsession. He had done the unthinkable, crossed lines that could never be erased, and still he could not let her go. He saw her hatred in her silence, in the way she turned her back on him, as if being near him contaminated her. It drove him mad. He was no longer the cold, calculating man he once was. That man had died the moment Clara recoiled from his touch. The man left behind was something desperate, something wild. He needed more than her presence. He needed her to see him, to feel something, anything besides fear. He had never begged in his life, but for her he would. He tried to speak, to offer her anything, everything, but she met him with silence, and the more she pulled away, the more he fell. It wasn't enough to keep her near. He wanted her to want him, to forgive him, to love him. But how could she? How could anyone love the man who had broken her? Still, he couldn't stop love, or what he believed to be love had taken root inside him like a sickness, twisting him, consuming him. He cornered her one evening, the room cloaked in shadows. "I will make this right," he said, voice hoarse with desperation. Clara didn't flinch, didn't cry. She only looked at him. Her eyes empty, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You can't." And in that moment, Adrian finally understood the truth. He hadn't just hurt her, he had destroyed something inside her, something he might never reach again, and the thought of losing her. It drove him to madness. Adrian had tried everything, wealth protection gifts beyond imagination, but none of it mattered. Not if she didn't look at him the way he needed her to. He wanted her heart, her soul, all of her, and he wouldn't stop until she was his. He began watching her more closely, studying every flicker of emotion across her face, every quiet breath she took, hoping to find a way in, a way to reach her, a way to make her want him. He brought her silk gowns, diamonds that caught the light like stardust. She turned away. He cooked for her, something he had never done for anyone in his life. She left the food untouched. She was slipping from him moment by moment, and the deeper she fell from his grasp, the more desperate he became. Nights became torment. He dreamt of her, not just her body, but the sound of her voice, soft, forgiving, calling his name, not with fear, but something like tenderness. It drove him mad. One night, he found himself outside her door, hands clenched, breath ragged. He had never hesitated before, never second-guessed himself. But now, he couldn't move. She was on the other side, fragile and frightened, and he was the reason why he couldn't force her. He knew that. But he couldn't let her go either, so finally he stepped inside. His heart pounded as he spoke the words he never imagined himself saying. "Tell me how to fix this," he said, voice low and cracked the sound of a man unraveling. She didn't answer, didn't even look at him. But her silence was louder than any scream. Her shoulders stiffened, her breath caught, and he knew. She was afraid of him, and it destroyed him. He had wanted her, but he had broken her instead. And now, for the first time, Adrian feared that she might already be gone, not in body, but in spirit. Meanwhile, Clara's hands trembled as she stuffed the last of her belongings into a small bag. Her heart thundered in her chest every second, dragging like an eternity. The air was too heavy to breathe. She had to run, she had to escape. Living in his world, under his obsessive gaze, under his control, was eroding her piece by piece. He said she belonged to him, but she refused that fate. She had been a prisoner in silence for too long, and even if freedom seemed impossible, she would try. She had to try, moving quietly. Clara tiptoed to the door, eyes darting behind her as though his shadow might rise at any second. But this time no one stood there, no one was watching. The corridor was empty, still. Even the mansion seemed to be holding its breath. Her bare feet made almost no sound on the cold marble floors as she slipped down the grand staircase. Her pulse pounded louder than her footsteps. She knew the main entrance was guarded, but she had overheard something a maid had whispered about a side door leading to the garden, one that wasn't always locked. She clung to that hope like a lifeline. Her breath hitched as she found the door and gripped the handle. For a moment, it wouldn't turn. Her heart stopped, but then, a soft click, the lock gave way. Cool night air met her skin like a kiss from the stars, the taste of freedom, the echo of a world beyond him. She had done it. She was outside, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until she disappeared completely. She didn't look back. With one last glance at the towering estate behind her, Clara took off into the night, her bare feet pounding the ground, each breath sharp and urgent. The lights of the city shimmered in the distance like a promise. If she could just reach the main road, the airport, the sky, maybe she could escape him. Maybe she could start again. Forget the thought of leaving him behind stabbed her chest like a blade, but she kept running, because she had to. She could still feel his hands, still hear his voice. The night he broke her wasn't behind her. It lived in every breath she took. For the first time in what felt like forever, she dared to believe in freedom, but it lasted only seconds. A sleek black car screeched to a stop ahead, cutting her path. Her heart stopped. Before she could move, strong arms seized her from behind, pulling her off her feet. "No!" She screamed, thrashing, kicking, but it was useless. She was trapped. And then, she knew that scent, that heat, that strength. Adrian. Her voice cracked as she gasped his name, fighting against his iron grip. You thought you could run from me? His voice was low, laced with fire and something more dangerous, desperation. He turned her to face him, hands clamped around her wrists, his eyes wild with emotion bore into hers. You're mine, Clara. He growled, each word thick with raw need. You don't get to leave me. She froze at the intensity in his gaze. For the first time she saw it, not just anger, but pain. The kind of pain that leaves no part of a person untouched. But she couldn't let herself care. Couldn't afford to believe in anything soft. Let me go, she whispered, his jaw locked, his grip tightening. Never. The word wasn't shouted. It was spoken like a vow. He wasn't just claiming her. He was pleading for her to understand, to feel what he couldn't say out loud. Tears filled her eyes. You don't own me, she choked out. But even as she said it, something inside her trembled. Because the truth was, a part of her had already been marked. Not by chains, but by him. And that terrified her more than anything else. Adrian saw it, the flicker of doubt, the weakness in her resistance, and it broke something inside him. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms, ignoring her protests, her fists pounding weakly against his chest. Put me down, she cried. Struggling, but he held her tighter, not out of violence, but fear. Fear that she'd vanish the moment he let go. He carried her to the car, holding her on his lap as the doors sealed around them. Drive, he said flatly, and the engine roared to life. Clara trembled in his grasp, body rigid, mind reeling. She had been so close to being free. And now she was back in his cage. Adrian leaned in his lips, brushing against her hair. You don't get to run from me, he murmured. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but underneath the softness was steel. You belong to me. A chill ran through her, not from the cold, but from the certainty in his tone, the possessiveness that refused to be masked. You're insane, she whispered, voice trembling. He let out a low, almost amused laugh. His fingers traced the length of her arm slowly. Maybe he said, but I don't care. I need you and I won't let you leave. His words struck her like thunder, and deep down she knew this wasn't over, not even close. Clara didn't want to believe it. This wasn't love. What Adrian felt for her, it wasn't tender, it wasn't kind, it was too consuming, too wild, too desperate. It was obsession, and yet. As he held her close, as his fingers trembled ever so slightly against her skin, something shifted in the air between them. She didn't know what it was. Fear, maybe. Or something even more dangerous, recognition. But one thing was clear, she was trapped. Not just in his arms, but in him. In the storm that was Adrian Wolfe. And no matter how far she ran, some part of her knew a part she didn't want to admit that she might never truly escape. Adrian had spent his entire life crushing anything that stood in his way. Competitors' threats, emotion, control was his religion, power was his shield. But now, for the first time, he was afraid, not of losing wealth, not of losing status, but of losing her. Clara. The girl who had made his cold heart stutter, the one who looked at him now with nothing but fear in her eyes. He had tried everything to soften her silence, to prove he wasn't just a monster, but she couldn't forgive him. She wouldn't. And then Nathan arrived. Adrian's oldest rival, his shadow in every boardroom, the man who thrived on silent wars, secret deals, stolen contracts, backroom sabotage. But this time, Nathan didn't want money. He wanted something far more valuable. He wanted Adrian's weakness, and now he had found it. Clara. He watched from afar, patient, calculating like a vulture circling the final fall. He saw her longing to escape, saw the cracks forming in her strength, and he waited. waited for the perfect moment to strike. It came one evening when Clara had managed to slip away, just for a moment. She wandered through the garden of Adrian's estate, her fingers brushing the cold iron gate that separated her from everything that used to feel real. She wanted out. Her heart screamed for it, and that's when she saw him. A tall man leaning against a black car just outside the gate. Sharp suit, dark eyes, a gaze that saw too much, like a bird in a golden cage. He said, voice smooth, his smile too warm for the chill in the air. "You don't belong here." Clara froze. No one had spoken to her like that in weeks. Not with control, not with ownership, but with clarity. "Who are you?" she asked, unsure. Taking a cautious step toward the gate, he tilted his head, studying her. "Someone who can help you disappear." She blinked. "You don't belong to him, Clara. You don't belong to a world made of locks and cages. You're too bright for this kind of darkness." The way he said Adrian's name made her pause. "You know him?" she asked, suspicion sliding into her voice. Nathan's smile sharpened. "Very well. And I know what he's done to you." Her stomach twisted. Did he truly know what Adrian had taken, what he had turned her into? Shame, wrapped around her like smoke, but then beneath it a flicker of hope. A way out. Was this real? Could she trust him? She looked into Nathan's eyes, into the promise they held, but something lingered beneath the surface. A shadow. A glint of something too smooth, too perfect, something that made her hesitate. And maybe she should have listened to that hesitation. There was something behind Nathan's smile, something too polished, too smooth. Clara couldn't name it, but she felt it. Something just beneath the charm that unsettled her. "Why would you help me?" she whispered, her voice barely above the wind. Nathan's smile didn't fade, but something colder flickered in his eyes. "Because I hate Adrian Wolfe," he said simply, "and taking you from him would be the greatest revenge I could ever ask for." The words hit her like ice. Clara took a small step back, the reality sinking in. Was she just a pawn? She had spent so long under Adrian's control, struggling to breathe, to survive, and now was she about to step into another man's cage? Nathan seemed to sense her retreat. His voice softened, his hand reaching through the gate palm open. "I can give you the life you deserve," he said. "Away from this, away from him. Let me take you somewhere safe." Clara stared at his hand, her heart thundering. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to run, to disappear, to leave the pain behind. But something rooted her to the spot. Fear, doubt. And something else she didn't want to admit. A tether, invisible, unexplainable, pulling her back toward Adrian. She hated what he had done to her. And yet, she wasn't sure she could walk away completely. The truth of that terrified her more than anything else. Before she could speak, before her heart could choose a voice, cut through the night like a blade. Step away from her. Clara turned. Adrian stood only a few feet away. His face carved in fury, his fists clenched, his entire body radiating rage. But beneath the anger, she saw it. Panic, fear, desperation. He had seen her standing there listening to Nathan, and in that moment he knew. He was about to lose her. And Adrian Wolfe never lost. Nathan smirked, lounging against the gate with ease. "Well, well, Adrian," he drawled. "Didn't think I'd find you this careless, letting something so precious slip through your fingers." He looked back at Clara, his eyes glittering with cruel delight. "Did he tell you, Clara," he said softly, "that you're the only thing in this world he's ever truly cared about?" She froze. The words hit something fragile inside her, not because she doubted them, but because some part of her wanted to believe them. But how could she? After everything. Before she could make sense of it, Adrian was at the gate. In one breathless motion, he grabbed Nathan by the collar, slamming him against the iron bars. His voice was a growl. "Stay away from her." Nathan didn't flinch. He just laughed. "Or what? You'll hit me. Kill me. Go ahead." His grin deepened. "But even if you destroy me, the truth won't change. You don't deserve her. And you know it." Adrian's jaw locked, pain flickering through his eyes. Clara saw it, felt it. Nathan stepped back, smoothing his jacket with mock patience. "I'll be waiting." "Clara," he said, voice low, "when you realize he'll never change, you'll know where to find me." And then he was gone. Swallowed by the night. Clara turned to Adrian, her heart pounding. She wanted answers. She needed them. But before she could speak, he reached for her, pulled her into his arms with a force that was both desperate and afraid. "Don't listen to him," he whispered, voice frayed. "Don't think of leaving me." She should have pushed him away, should have screamed, should have run, but instead, she froze, wrapped in his arms, her mind splintered in two, every breath a war, every heartbeat a betrayal of itself, because despite the fear, despite the pain, despite everything, she knew what this was. Adrian Wolfe wasn't just obsessed, he was falling in love. And the moment he discovered that Nathan wanted her, not just to hurt him, but to have her, something in him had shifted, because control was no longer enough. Now he was fighting to keep her. Something inside. Adrian snapped. What once was obsession now burned like wildfire, untamed, all-consuming. A storm with no end, a madness that wrapped around his bones and refused to let go. Ever since he had discovered Clara's innocence, his world had cracked. His control had frayed thread by thread. But this was war. No one would take her from him. Not now. Not after everything. He couldn't bear the thought. Nathan's voice in her ear, his hands reaching for what was never his, promising her escape. Luring her away with pretty lies, Adrian's mind spiraled. She had been marked by his darkness, bruised by his mistakes, and yet still, she belonged to him. Whether she hated him or feared him, none of it mattered. She was his to protect, his to keep, his to love, whether or not she was ready to believe it. And if Nathan thought he could touch her parade, her like some prize, he was about to learn just who Adrian Wolfe truly was. When he learned that Nathan was hosting a gala that evening, an exclusive event brimming with CEOs, politicians, and press, he didn't hesitate. No more games, no more patience. His black car screeched to a halt outside the glittering ballroom. The golden light of chandeliers spilled through massive glass walls as he stepped out, a storm dressed in tailored black. He didn't knock. He didn't pause. He tore the doors open and strode in his presence, a blade slicing through silk. Gasps rose as people turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Whispers spread like sparks. Adrian Wolfe had arrived, and he was furious. Then he saw her. Clara stood near the center of the room, dressed in silver that shimmered like moonlight, her frame delicate, her face unreadable. She stood beside Nathan, too close. Nathan had dared to dress her up, to make her look like his Adrian's hands curled into fists. Nathan caught his eye and raised a glass with a smirk. "Adrian," he said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd crash the party." Adrian didn't answer. He pushed forward, ignoring the startled gasps, brushing past guests like they weren't even there. He stopped in front of her. Clara. The only thing he could still feel. Without hesitation, he grabbed her wrist, firm, unshakable. She gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. Adrian. But he didn't let her speak. "You belong to me," he said, his voice hoarse with something deeper than rage, something close to breaking. His grip tightened not to hurt, but to hold. As if letting go meant losing her forever. The entire room froze. Gasps echoed. The cold, unreachable CEO was here in the center of a grand ballroom, declaring love in the only way he knew how. Clara stared at him stunned. Why, she whispered, "Why do you care so much?" His heart pounded against his ribs. The truth wanted to escape. Because without you, nothing makes sense. Because every breath without you is emptiness. Because I love you, but he couldn't say it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned closer, forehead brushing hers, breath trembling. Because you're mine. Then not anymore. Nathan's voice cut in sharp and smug. He stepped forward, his confidence a spark against Adrian's already frayed edges. That was the final crack. Adrian's free hand clenched into a fist. And in one brutal motion, he swung his knuckles, connecting with Nathan's jaw, sending him stumbling backward through the crowd. The room erupted into chaos, but Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't see the cameras. He didn't care about the scandal. There was only her, and he wasn't letting go. Screams broke through the air. The music died. Security rushed in, but none dared come between the two titans now at war, men who didn't just own empires but commanded fear. Nathan staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his lip with the back of his hand. He let out a bitter laugh. Touched a nerve, did I? Adrian's eyes never left Clara. His voice came out low, deadly. You don't get to touch her. He turned to Clara, his grip now steadier, not forceful, but protective. His voice softened, yet burned with urgency. We're leaving. Clara froze for the first time. She didn't know what she wanted. To run. To stay. Adrian had hurt her in ways she hadn't yet learned how to heal. But the look in his eyes, now that quiet desperation, the silent plea, stirred something she wasn't ready to name. Did he truly care? Behind them, Nathan pushed himself upright, rage bleeding into every syllable. You think you can force her to stay. That love is about possession. Adrian didn't flinch. I think love is about never letting go, and with that he lifted Clara into his arms. No words, no permission. Just a man carrying the one thing he couldn't afford to lose in front of an audience of cameras, murmurs, and judgment. But Adrian didn't care. This wasn't over. This war had only begun. But he had already decided he would fight for her, no matter what it took. Adrian Wolfe had never needed to chase anything. Power, money, loyalty, all had bowed before him with ease. He was a man used to commanding, but Clara, she was different. She couldn't be bought, couldn't be bent. He had tried to hold her with dominance, with fear, but that was no longer enough. He didn't just want her near. He wanted her love. He wanted her to look at him without fear in her eyes. To stay not because he demanded it, but because she chose to. And so, for the first time in his carefully constructed life, Adrian changed. The man who once believed that love was a weakness began to rebuild himself, not to control her, but to deserve her. He started with restraint. No more storms crashing through doors, no more silence turned suffocation. He knocked now. He waited. He watched her from a respectful distance, memorizing every fragile, beautiful part of her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way her lip caught beneath her teeth when lost in thought, the way her eyes, so much like dusk, seemed to carry the weight of the entire sky. And then, one evening beneath a quiet sunset, he did the one thing he had never done in his life. He apologized. Clara stood alone on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself, the fading sun casting gold across her skin. Adrian stood behind her, hesitating for once. Then he spoke. Clara. She stiffened but didn't turn. That small gesture, the way she tensed at his voice, shattered something inside him. Still he stepped closer and closer until he stood beside her. For a long moment, silence lingered, and then, voice rough and raw, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, eyes scanning his face, searching for the lie. But it wasn't there. There was no mask. Only a man stripped bare, broken, but honest. Adrian's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists as though holding the weight of what he was about to say. I was wrong. He said I hurt you. I don't know how to undo what I've done. But I swear. Clara, I'll spend the rest of my life trying. She opened her mouth, but no words came. How do you trust someone who once shattered you? How do you believe a man who once made you afraid to breathe? And then just as the last of her walls tried to hold, he did something unexpected. Something that changed everything. He reached. Adrian reached for her hand, but this time he didn't pull. He didn't possess, didn't demand, didn't drag her back into his world. Instead, he simply held it softly, tenderly, as if her hand were something sacred, as if she were something fragile, something he couldn't afford to break again. Clara's heart stuttered. This wasn't the man who had once stood before her in shadows and fire. This wasn't the ruthless, unreadable figure who had stolen her will and drowned her in fear. This was someone else. Someone trying, someone learning, someone loving. And for the first time, Clara saw it, truly saw it. The ache in his eyes, the desperation behind his silence, the quiet pleading in the way he looked at her. He loved her, and no matter how many reasons she gave herself not to believe it, some small, rebellious part of her wanted to. The days that followed were filled with surprises. Adrian changed. He no longer barked orders, no longer loomed in doorways or dictated her choices. He courted her awkwardly, earnestly, like a man discovering romance for the first time. His gifts weren't grand gestures meant to impress, but intimate tokens. A worn first edition of her favorite book, a bracelet silver and delicate with her initials engraved by hand. A painting of the sunset, because he had noticed how long she stood at the window each evening, silently watching it disappear. He even cooked for her once. It ended in smoke, burnt pasta, and a fire alarm. She laughed, truly laughed, and Adrian memorized the sound like a prayer. He watched her, learned her, loved her, and slowly, ever so slowly, Clara's walls began to crack. She noticed the softness in his gaze, the way he never reached unless invited, the way his presence no longer felt like a storm, but a steady, calming gravity. She caught herself pausing when he entered a room, staying longer than she needed, listening to the way his voice faltered when he was unsure, feeling her heartbeat betray her every time he looked at her like she was the only person who had ever mattered. And one night beneath a sky of quiet stars, Adrian reached for her hand again, just like he had on the balcony, and this time, Clara didn't pull away. She let him hold her, and when he whispered, "Let me love you, Clara," she didn't say no, because maybe, just maybe, he already had. She spent days trying to make sense of the storm inside her chest, fear, confusion, the ache of trust reborn too soon. But no matter how hard she tried to silence her heart, one truth grew louder. Adrian Wolfe was changing, and so was she. She had once feared him deeply, rightfully. She had dreamed of escape. But now, when he was near, her body no longer recoiled. Her heart fluttered. It hesitated. It felt. How could she want anything from the man who had once broken her? How could she ache for the touch of someone who had once made her feel so small? But every time she met his eyes, those storm-filled hazel eyes full of remorse and something deeper, something nameless, she felt herself slipping further into a truth she didn't want to face. He was no longer the man who had shattered her. And she was no longer the woman who had only feared him one evening as gold and pink brushed the sky. Clara stood in the garden alone, or so she thought. She felt him behind her, not close, not crowding. Just there, always there. He had learned not to push, not to speak, unless she welcomed it. But his presence burned like a flame, warm and patient. "You've been avoiding me?" His voice finally said, low deep. "Careful." A shiver slipped down her spine. Her fingers curled into the folds of her dress. Because it was true she had been avoiding him, not because she hated him anymore, but because every time she looked at him, she felt herself giving in. She turned slowly, lifting her gaze to meet his dark, stormy, unreadable. "I haven't," she whispered. But they both knew she was lying. He took a step closer, and then another, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast. Then, "Look at me," he murmured. "Look at me," he murmured. And she did. That was her mistake. Because the moment Clara met Adrian's eyes, everything she'd built, every fragile wall, every scar-covered shield began to crack. He wasn't the ruthless man from that terrible night. He wasn't the cold-hearted CEO who had once made her tremble. He was just Adrian now. A man lost. A man trying. A man standing before her soul, bared, waiting for her to see him. And it broke something in her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, voice shaking under the weight of emotion. "Why are you trying so hard?" Adrian exhaled a harsh breath that trembled with the truth. "Because I can't lose you," he said, his voice unsteady. "Because I don't know how to breathe without you. And because the moment I realized what I'd done, I knew I could never forgive myself." He paused, eyes searching hers. "But even more than that, I knew I could never let you go." His words hit her like a storm, not because they were sweet, but because they were real. And she wasn't ready for real. Her chest tightened. She wanted to push him away, to scream that it was too late, that he had already broken her. But then he reached for her hand. Not with force, not with control, with trembling fingers. Adrian Wolfe, the man who once believed emotion was weakness, was shaking. For her, Clara's breath hitched. Her skin burned where he touched her, and no matter how she tried to fight it, the truth curled around her like fire. She was already falling, not by choice, not with reason, but with a heart that no longer listened to anything but him. "Clara." Adrian whispered, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Each touch, featherlight. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't feel me, the way I feel you." She opened her mouth. She wanted to lie, wanted to scream. No, but the words refused to come. Because every time she looked into his eyes filled with longing, with remorse, with something far too deep to name the truth clawed up from her chest, she breathed, but the rest caught in her throat. Adrian didn't push. He only stood there holding her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to this world. And in that moment, Clara realized she was standing at the edge of something irreversible, something she could no longer outrun. She was falling in love with the man she once promised herself she would never forgive. Adrian had never known fear. Not like this. Not the fear of losing wealth or power or empires, but the raw, paralyzing fear of losing her. Clara had become everything. The air in his lungs, the warmth in his chest, the only light that could reach the frozen places inside him. And now, he stood before her with nothing left to hide. The penthouse was dim, lit only by flickering candlelight. Roses lined the room, their scent wrapping around the space like a heartbeat, but all Adrian saw was his Clara. She stood by the balcony, fingers curled tightly around the railing like she needed something to keep her steady. City lights glimmered beyond her, reflecting in her wide, uncertain eyes. She was afraid, and he didn't blame her. He had wounded her in ways she hadn't deserved, had stolen things he could never return. But still, he had fallen hopelessly, irreversibly. Not just obsessed, not just desperate, but in love, a love so consuming it frightened even him, a love so deep there was no escaping it, not for him, not for her, not anymore. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. every breath a silent prayer that she wouldn't run. This wasn't about possession anymore. This was surrender. "Clara," he said, his voice a hushed rasp. And this time, it wasn't a command. It was a confession. He spoke her name, barely a whisper, and still Clara flinched. It wasn't his voice that scared her. It was what it made her feel. Adrian's chest tightened. He had never begged for anything in his life, never cared enough to plead, but tonight he would fall to his knees if it meant a second chance. "Look at me," he said, his voice trembling with restraint. His hands ached to reach for her, but he didn't move. She had to choose him. She had to come. For a long, excruciating moment, she didn't move. And then slowly, carefully, she turned. His breath caught in his throat. God, she was beautiful, not in the way that turned heads, in the way that broke him. She was beautiful in her pain, in her defiance, in the quiet strength that had never left her, despite everything he had done. Her innocence hadn't been destroyed. It had simply learned how to survive, and it undid him. He stepped forward, barely holding himself together. "I know I don't deserve you," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you in ways I'll never be able to undo." He clenched his jaw, then forced the words out, words that had lived buried beneath pride for too long. "But I love you, Clara." The air between them shattered. Silence fell heavy, suffocating. She stared at him, stunned, as if unsure if she had heard him right. Truthfully, he could hardly believe it himself. He had never said those words to anyone, not once. Love had always been a weakness in his world, something to be avoided, controlled, hidden. But with Clara, love had become inevitable. "I don't just want you in my bed," he whispered, stepping closer still. "I want you in my life. Every day. Always." A breath escaped her lips, fragile, trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. He could see the war inside her heart against reason, past against possibility, but he didn't rush her. Instead, he took her hands. His touch was reverent, as if she were made of glass. "I know you don't trust me," he said, his thumb gently grazing her skin. "And I don't blame you." He swallowed. "But if even the smallest part of you feels what I feel, don't fight it. Please, don't run." Then in a voice no longer proud, no longer commanding, but human, he whispered, "Stay." Clara's breath hitched. He saw it the moment her walls gave way, the moment the battle inside her heart collapsed under the weight of truth. With a soft, broken sob, she stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Her fingers clutched his shirt, as though she feared he might disappear if she let go. Relief hit him like a tidal wave. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her with everything he had, not to keep her, not to cage her, but to cherish her. He breathed her in, memorizing every detail, every shiver, every heartbeat pressed against his own. This wasn't about possession, this was love. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Wolfe knew he would do anything to protect it. To protect her. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. His eyes searched hers, no longer demanding but pleading. "Tell me you'll stay." Clara's lips parted. Her eyes shimmered with hesitation, fear, and something else. Something soft. Something true. And then she said, the one word that would change everything. Yes, Adrian didn't wait. He kissed her. Not with hunger. Not with dominance. With love. Fierce. Deep. Undeniable. The kind of love that doesn't ask permission because it already lives inside the soul. And this time when she kissed him back, it wasn't from fear. It was from want. From freedom. From a heart that had finally stopped running. There was no hesitation now. No more walls. Only them. Adrian saw it in Clara's eyes, the surrender, the stillness, the yes that needed no words. It caught his breath, made his hands tremble as they reached for her, unsure if this moment was real, She was his, not by control, not by obsession, but by choice. His fingers brushed over her skin, soft as breath, and a shiver ran through her, not from fear, but from something far deeper. Longing Clara. He breathed, his voice low, raw, thick with unspoken devotion. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, his eyes locking onto hers. He waited, gave her space to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she leaned into his touch eyes, fluttering closed lips, parting with silent permission. That was all it took. With a groan pulled straight from his soul, he drew her into his arms, his mouth finding hers with reverence. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't hunger. It was everything. Soft, deep, full of every emotion they'd buried, every truth they hadn't dared to speak. He kissed her like she was air, like she was his beginning and his end. Clara melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest, fingers tangling in his hair. Her body lit with heat, a flame that flickered, not from fear, but from want. Real want. "Adrian," she whispered against his lips, her breath unsteady, her voice stripped bare. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the charged stillness. "Say it again." He murmured, his hand slipping down her spine, as though trying to remember every inch of her Adrian. His name from her lips was a salvation, a sound he could live inside forever. With another broken groan, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, the same bed that had once witnessed pain. But tonight it would witness something different, something healing, something true. He laid her down, gently watching her with awe. His body hovered above hers, not with dominance, but with devotion. His lips returned to hers, slower now, savoring, worshipping. A kiss that said, "I see you, I choose you." His hands moved over her with reverent patience, mapping her skin like holy ground. Every sigh, every gasp, every whisper. He kissed her neck, her shoulders, the spaces where she'd once carried fear, erasing it, rewriting it with tenderness. Clara arched beneath him, her fingers gripping his shoulders as pleasure built, slow, aching, unrelenting. There was no rush, no conquest. Only love pouring from his touch, his gaze, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. He wasn't just with her, he was in this with her body and soul, heart and breath. They moved together in perfect rhythm, slow and deep, as if their hearts had waited a lifetime for this moment. And maybe they had. And when it finally broke over them, when breath gave way to moans, to release to stillness, she knew. There was no going back, no more doubt, no more running. She loved him. With every piece of her heart that had been broken, with every piece he had helped to mend as their bodies quieted, tangled in warmth and closeness. Adrian held her tighter. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering there, as if he never wanted to leave. His voice was husky, shaken. "You're mine, Clara, forever." And this time she didn't flinch. She smiled, because she was. And for the first time, she didn't resist. She didn't run. She didn't deny the truth that had been growing quietly inside her heart. Instead, Clara whispered the words that unraveled him completely, "And you're mine." A slow, stunned smile spread across Adrian's lips. Not the smirk of a man who had conquered, but the tender, breathless smile of a man who had been chosen. He held her close, his mouth brushing soft promises against her skin, vows of protection, of devotion, of forever. And together, in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Adrian Wolfe had never known fear. Not truly. He had never faced the terrifying ache of needing someone so deeply that the mere thought of losing them felt like drowning. But now, as he stood before Clara, the woman who had changed everything, holding a ring that glittered like starlight in his trembling hand, his heart thundered against his chest. This was it. Not a business deal. Not a power move. not another calculated choice. This was surrender, complete, unguarded, soul-deep surrender. He wasn't kneeling as a CEO, not as a man who once tried to own her, but as a man who loved her hopelessly, irreversibly. She had taken the cold, hollow shell of who he'd been and filled it with warmth, with meaning, with something he never believed he could feel. He'd once mistaken obsession for love. But this was something sacred. The evening unfolded like a dream. Adhering had left nothing to chance. Every detail was a whispered homage to the woman who had saved him. A private island, a sky ablaze with gold and rose as the sun dipped into the sea, a path of red rose petals leading to a candle-lit pavilion perched over the edge of the world. The scent of jasmine clung to the breeze, and the waves whispered like music, echoing the rhythm of his heart, and at the center of it all stood her Clara, his salvation. His answer. She looked almost unreal, dressed in flowing white, her hair cascading in soft waves down her back, the light caught in her blue-gray eyes, wide with wonder, with love, with a hint of disbelief. She didn't know. She didn't yet know that this moment would change everything. Adhering took a steadying breath and dropped to one knee. The weight of it hit him like thunder, not the weight of fear, but of meaning. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her breath catching as she saw him, the man who had once ruled entire empires, kneeling before her, not as a king, but as a man stripped bare. Clara, he began, voice hoarse, thick with emotion. From the moment you entered my life, everything changed. I was lost, drowning in power control, a darkness I didn't even see. I believed love was weakness. I believed I was untouchable. He looked up at her eyes, shining hands, trembling. But then he exhaled. You were light. You were fire. You were everything. I never knew I needed. I tried to fight it. God knows I tried. But I couldn't outrun what I felt for you. There was no escaping it. I love you. More than I've ever loved anything. I don't just want you in my life. Clara, I need you. His voice faltered. I need you forever. A tear slipped down her cheek. She was looking at the man she had once feared, the man she had once tried to escape. And yet standing before her now on one knee, bearing his soul to her, she didn't see a captor. She saw the man she loved, the man she had fallen for, not because he was perfect, but because he had been willing to become something better for her. Adhering. She whispered, her voice trembling, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might break. He reached for her hand, steady, certain. His grip was warm, unshakable. Marry me. He said, not as a demand, but as a plea. His voice rough with emotion, his eyes burning with something deeper than desire. Be my wife, be mine in every way. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you are and will always be the only thing that truly mattered. The world held its breath. Silence stretched between them, thick with tears, with wonder, with a joy too big for words. Clara's heart spun in a storm of disbelief, love and overwhelming soul-deep happiness. And then with a sob that tore straight from her chest, she nodded. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Adhering, I'll marry you. His smile was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not victorious, not arrogant, just free. His eyes darkened with awe, with love, with a possessive tenderness that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with devotion. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect diamond, a perfect promise, not of ownership, but of forever, and then he stood and kissed her fierce, breathless, a kiss that silenced the world. It was a kiss of vows, of redemption, of a future rewritten. Their wedding was a dream, sculpted in light. Adhering made sure of it. A cathedral dressed in white roses, a dress that shimmered like moonlight spun from elegance and softness, music that wept, candles that whispered, and a love so palpable it stirred every heart in the room. As Clara walked down the aisle, her eyes never left his. And in that moment she understood something she had once denied. Fate had always meant for them to collide. No matter the pain, no matter the fear, he had always been hers, and now with trembling hands and full hearts they made it eternal. Adhering couldn't wait for the words, "You may now kiss the bride." He pulled her to him, kissing her with a hunger softened by love, by laughter, by all they had survived to get here. She was his, and he was hers, and nothing else mattered. Their honeymoon was a dream painted in oceans and silk. They woke in each other's arms, whispered promises beneath foreign skies, kissed beneath falling stars. They visited the most beautiful corners of the world. But the only view Adhering ever truly saw was her. He was no longer the man she had once feared. He had become something greater. A man in love, completely, hopelessly, eternally. He gave her everything, not just riches or luxury, but his heart, his soul, his truth. And Clara, the girl who once stood trembling on the edge of a stranger's world, now stood at the center of his world, his heart. His home years passed. Their love never faded. It deepened with laughter, with forgiveness, with late-night dances in their kitchen, and tiny feet echoing through their home. They had children, each one a piece of their story made flesh. And yet to Adhering, she never changed. She was still the girl who had undone him with a glance, still the woman who taught him to feel, still the only name his heart had ever truly spoken. She was his first love, his last love, his only love, his wife, his queen, his everything. And as long as he breathed, he would never ever let her go. She had once feared him, he had once tried to own her, but love, real love, doesn't demand, doesn't control, it transforms. What began in darkness was reborn in light, not because they were perfect, but because they chose to fight, to forgive. To stay Clara and Adrian's story wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, human. But in the end, it became something powerful, a reminder that even the most broken hearts can find their way home. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of love is the one worth waiting for. If this story touched you, if it made you feel even a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because at Shining Stories, we believe every heart deserves to be seen, and every story, no matter how dark, can find its light. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay inspired.